You're listening to 91 Reasons, a journey into the twisted landscape of pop culture. Keep your hands and arms inside the podcast at all times. And now, the voice, Jeff Tucker.
Sometimes I sit down in front of this microphone and I know exactly what I'm going to say. I know what the show's going to be about. I have worked it over in my head for days and days and days. And other times, like today, I don't know. And the reason I say that is I've actually thought about this show for a few days. I'm supposed to be doing movie reviews because I got some amazing Patreon pledgers who have picked a stack of movies for me to watch and review. And I will get to them. But occasionally, folks, we have to take a detour. And the detour takes us down the darker alleys, the nocturne alleys of Diagon Alley, if you know what I'm talking about in nerd talk, right? And what's interesting is that where do you even begin? I mean, this thing I'm going to, by the title, it's going to be about George Lucas. But this thing that I've been wrestling with is so utterly bizarre to me because I've spent the last decade since Revenge of the Sith irritated that George Lucas wouldn't give me what I wanted. And how dare he hold Star Wars hostage in the halls of Lucasfilm. And then 3 years ago, he turned the keys over to somebody else. And he sold all of Lucasfilm, which includes Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Howard the Duck and Tucker the Man in His Dream and Radioland Murders. And I would assume, to some degree, I'm sure American Graffiti's mixed in there somewhere, even though they had distribution deals by other studios. But the entirety of Lucasfilm was bundled up and sold. Disney bought it, $4 billion. And part of me thought, wow, this is truly amazing, because you know what's going to happen. You know that Disney is going to take this thing and write it for all it's worth, because if there's one thing Disney knows how to do as a company, it's, I was going to say nurture, but it's somewhere, listen to this, folks, somewhere between nurture on my left hand and exploit on my right hand. We're somewhere in the middle, because we're going to, yes, you the Star Wars fan, we're going to give you the movies that you want, the movies that you've waited for, that you've dreamed of. They're going to come to the cinemas. And isn't that great? And yes, it is great that at this moment right now I can leave my house, and if I wanted to, I could go buy a ticket for The Force Awakens again and again and again, and a lot of people have. That's truly great. And I'm thankful that the Walt Disney Company, after spending $4 billion, spent even more money to make that movie. Folks, in your real life, this is like you buying the most expensive car in the world without an engine. So you spend $250,000 on a car, then you have to buy an engine for it. That's what they did with Star Wars. Now, I know that the reports were that before the movie even hit theaters, they made all their money back in merchandise. And that's selling $4 billion worth of Star Wars merchandise is not the same as making $4 billion in profit. And though the media loves to report it that way, I, the, sane person, knows differently. If I have a lemonade stand, and at the end of the day I made $30, I've actually only made $25 because $5 went for the lemonade and the ice and the cups, right? That's just business. But we also knew, we the fans, that in addition to getting a new Star Wars movie to be very thankful for, we were also going to be overloaded, if you were, with more Star Wars merchandise than anybody could ever dream of keeping up with, even my friend Steve Sansweet, who has the largest Star Wars collection in the known universe. Like, it's just too much. And there was a time where I even collected, like, Pepperidge Farm Star Wars cookie boxes. And I know Steve Sansweet went one step further and had the cookies shellacked to preserve them. Like, I had Star Wars toothbrushes and pocket combs and action figures and pajamas and sheets and a lunchbox and everything in between. And that was from the first run only. And then in the 90s when it came back, I bought even more stuff. I had cases of carded figures. I had every vehicle, every 12-inch doll. It's Star Wars stuff coming out my ears, and I would look at it all, and I'd be very happy to have it because, Star Wars has always made me very happy. Even though there were purchases I made, I'm like, why am I buying this? What am I going to do with this? I saw that they had Star Wars coffee flavors in bottles with Wookiees and R2 on them. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? Part of the Star Wars attraction is the avalanche of merchandise that comes along with every new film, and we the fans know this, and nobody knows this better than the Walt Disney Company, who makes products of every shape and size. It's unbelievable. I know that on the internet there's a picture of BB-8 branded oranges. It's like, oh my God, it's everything we could possibly think of. Except Happy Meals, because we don't want kids to eat fast food. If you want any kind of Star Wars Happy Meal, you got to go to Subway, which is just silly. There should be a Burger King tie-in with 75 different toys. Give me a break. People are going to eat crap. That's just the way it goes, right? But again, and I keep stressing this, we the fans knew this was coming. I predicted this years ago. I said, man, you think George Lucas knows how to market a Star Wars movie? You ain't seen nothing yet after what Disney can get through with you. I mean, have you been to the Disney store lately? It looks like Frozen. It looks like not Luke. It looks like Kylo Ren married Elsa. And this is their honeymoon suite, because they're everywhere. And this is the company that already bought Marvel. Like, they had all the stables. Disney has the Princess line, the Tinkerbell line, Marvel Comics, Pixar, Lucasfilm. I mean, oh my God. And the centerpiece of all this, obviously, is The Force Awakens. And there was no doubt. Look, it's not a movie, guys. Force Awakens is not a movie. Yes, it's a movie in its purest sense. But more importantly, it's a product launch. It's even more than a product launch. It's a lifestyle launch. Star Wars is being sold as a lifestyle, the way Apple is a lifestyle. We all know this. This is nothing new. I'm not coming up with any brand new epiphanies here. But the weird hitch in all of this is George Lucas himself. And he's actually given a few interviews. I think he's talked more for the release of The Force Awakens than he did on any of the original Star Wars movies or even the prequel movies. I think that he gave a few interviews here and there, but nothing along the way of the candid interview that he just gave to Charlie Rose. And it's part of that thing where we all dream of it. We all dream of getting either old enough or rich enough to say whatever we want to say. And Lucas has been at that point for the last 40 years. He just hasn't acted on it. And now that he's acting on it, people are kind of losing their minds. And when he goes on Charlie Rose and says that selling Star Wars to Disney is like selling his kids to white slavers, everybody erupts. It's like, wait a minute, whoa. Let's break it down, shall we? He's totally right. George Lucas is completely right in saying that. He said it off the cuff. That's when people really say what they really mean, is when somebody leans in and goes, what do you really think? And he goes, it's like selling it to white slavers. Boom. Right there. And this is before the movie comes out. Before I don't know if he had seen Force Awakens, because I know he saw an early rough cut, or this is, everything's kind of the timeline's a little weird, and and I think everyone's trying to get way past this because nobody wants to deal with this white slaver comment because it gets in the way of box office. It gets in the way of purses. It gets in the way of T-shirts. It gets in the way of all this Kylo Ren stuff we're being inundated with, right? But look at it from George Lucas's point of view, and a lot of people I got friends on Facebook. I put up this really interesting article where the crux of it was J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens basically is just a rehash of A New Hope, and I've already said that. Everybody who's a big Star Wars fan, in their hearts they know this. So again, this is not anything new. There's no epiphany here, right? But this guy had the audacity to say that it took J.J. Abrams making a forgery to show that George Lucas is an artist. Well, of course he's an artist. And anybody who has a problem with George Lucas needs to leave the room. Okay? It's as simple as that. Leave the room. Because you can't have Star Wars without George Lucas. You can make 10,000 versions of A Christmas Carol, but it still belongs to Charles Dickens. And that's the way it goes. And it's weird to think, and this must be part of Lucas's deal, It's weird to think that George Lucas is going to be remembered for Star Wars. Obviously, that's it. He is going to, on his tombstone, when they're ding ding ding, making it out of granite, ding ding ding, it's going to say George Lucas, the maker, and then his dates, right? But he's done so much more than just Star Wars. But we're going to take it here. Even if he just did Star Wars, even if he was a one-trick pony, that would be enough. Because I don't know what I would have done as a child without Star Wars. Star Wars came along at just the right time in my life. My mom was getting a divorce. Our house was up for sale. We were told we were going to have to move into an apartment. Life was ending. Life as we know it was ending. But I knew when I got home from school, I would crack open my Darth Vader case, take out my Star Wars figures, get my AT-AT, my Falcon, my X-Wing, and anything that happened in that world was up to me. The good guys always won, the bad guys were defeated, and the balance was restored. And you don't have that without George Lucas. This is the guy who, and again, think about this. Not only did he have the vision of this insane movie that nobody understood, that him and Ralph McQuarrie got together. And, imagine in 1975, he's trying to explain to Ralph McQuarrie what he wants. Now, Ralph McQuarrie is a pretty experienced artist at that time, but this must have seemed crazy. I want you to take the robot from Metropolis, and there's going to be a little robot that kind of looks like the one from Silent Running, and they're in the desert. Oh, my God. And it's the McQuarrie paintings, along with Lucas's vision, that sold Star Wars to the studio. After everybody turned him down, it was Alan Ladd at Fox who said, no, we're going to take a chance on this. Because it's going to be, $7 million? Not a big deal. And by the way, the other vision part of that is that George Lucas goes in and says, hey, I'm not even going to take a director's fee for this movie if you give me the merchandise rights. And right there, think about this, that, I love this part of pop culture. I love that you can actually imagine in your head the moments that have shaped your life. And I know that somewhere there was a meeting, and I don't want to think of it as between memos. I want it to be a meeting where Lucas is sitting across from the people at Fox, and he's pitching this movie, and at the end he goes, I won't even take a director's credit if you give me the merchandise rights. And in that conversation, we're talking 1975, early 76, in that conversation, that decision is going to directly affect my existence. Because I'm going to see Star Wars, and more than anything, want to play with the toys that have come out that allow me to not only reenact the movie, but come up with my own grand adventures for Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and all the other company, right? And there was a meeting where that happened. And George Lucas sat there and put his whole chips on somebody somewhere wanting to buy a toy of an idea in his head. Something that really never worked. They had tried movie merchandising with Dr. Dolittle and a few Planet of the Apes, and it kind of worked and kind of didn't. But I mean, he created. Not only did George Lucas help create, along with, of course, Steven Spielberg with Jaws, the summer movie-going experience, which has somehow been transplanted to Christmas because. They did a study and found out that people are more nostalgic around Christmas. True story. But George Lucas, along with Spielberg, creates the summer movie. It's hard to even. I mean, I told you this show would be freeform, but think about that. I'm talking about toys and merchandise, but he also helped herald in the summer movie-going experience, which prior to 1975 and Jaws didn't exist. Jaws was an anomaly. They released Star Wars on Memorial Day weekend to get rid of it because nobody goes to the movie through summer. They're going to say that Jaws was an anomaly and it's never going to happen again, and then suddenly everybody's lining up around the building to see Star Wars again and again and again. So we've got a guy who created not only the summer movie-going experience, which we all look forward to now. I mean, oh my God. I can't wait for summer. That's when all the good movies come out, right? And I've been doing that my entire life. So he does that. He does the toy generation. And I haven't even scratched the surface of what George Lucas, the creative force, is responsible for. And yet, everybody is so quick right now to just throw this guy away because he had some negative things to say about The Force Awakens, which I don't understand. And they go, well, he sold it to Disney, so whatever they do with it, he's got to be okay with it. No, he doesn't. Ask a guy who has an amicable divorce with a woman, and the first time he sees her out in public with another guy, he's pissed. Doesn't matter how old you are, how modern you are, how much manners you are. There's still deep down going to be a little moment of that guy's with my girl, and women are the same way. That girl's with my guy, and it never goes away. I'm gonna be friends with my ex. Oh, sure. And their new spouse. Oh, that's great. How's that going to work out? And you know what? Yes, it does. It works out every day. But there's always a little issue there. Because you helped build a marriage, you had a life together, and now it's gone and somebody else has moved in. Well, you're talking about Star Wars. Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, R2-D2, C-3. These are his kids. These came from his brain. And now they belong to somebody else. So yeah, I forgive the guy if he's got a little acid in his voice. 5 years from now, he's going to be fine. But this is this is raw, this is new, this is fresh. And anybody who wants to write him off does not know George Lucas. And the reason I say this is that when I was a kid, I knew that Star Wars was a movie. It wasn't like, how do you describe it? It wasn't like the kids watch Frozen today and they want Frozen to be real and they're going to dress like Elsa and they're going to sing, let it go, I'm in the movie, I'm in Frozen. When Carl Harmon and I and Toby played Star Wars, we had new adventures. We wanted to somehow harness the bravado, the heroism of the Star Wars universe so that we, the nerdy little kids of Lambton Elementary, could somehow be heroes that save the galaxy. And it was fun. It was fun. And I mean, imagine what would life... Okay, because, I knew early on that it was a movie and that this guy George Lucas was responsible for it. He's the guy that made the movie. I had the trading cards, they had behind the scenes, I had the magazines and the making of book and all of that. So George Lucas became to me, wasn't my father, but he was someone I looked up to immensely because he was able to create an entire universe that seemed so real and tangible that we all wanted to be a part of it. Every stick became a lightsaber. Every gun, forget about it. My generation didn't play Cowboys and Indians. We played Rebel Forces and Stormtroopers. That's just what we did. So, my mom got me a book one time called Skywalking, and it was George Lucas's life story. And in it, he talks about wrecking his car. And I can remember at age, 12 or 13, having that passage in the book having a really profound effect on me, because I thought, what would I have been like as a person if George Lucas had died in that car wreck? Because Star Wars, Lucasfilm was my life. And the thought of it never having existed, it was hard to fathom. I asked somebody once, my teacher, Mr. Benton, who I idolized, what would I have done if there had been Star Wars? He told me I would have liked Star Trek with the same passion as Star Wars. And I didn't believe him. Even back then, I didn't believe him. I thought, no, I probably would have found, I wouldn't have been into football, but he probably would have been monster movies. Because I was really into famous monsters of filmland and all of that. But not like gore movies. Not bloody gory movies, but like movies that had actual monsters in it, because what Star Wars did for me initially was make me want to get a job doing special effects, because I saw these young guys, they were working in Van Nuys in a warehouse, building spaceships out of parts from other models and then blowing them up and then showing you that's what an X-Wing does. And this thing in the parking lot is going to become the surface of the Death Star. And I thought all that was great. I was like, oh my God, I could do that. And you can imagine how pissed off my mother got when she would buy me model kits at Save-On and I would kit bash them into something else. She'd go, where's that 57 Chevy? Oh, I made it into a flying car. Uh-huh. Well, I did. I put two kits together, and I made a flying car. She did not get it at all. She didn't have the vision to look. I've always say, you got to look past what it is and think about what it could be. And that's what George Lucas did. Here's a guy, went to film school, was very into racing cars and speed, and made some short movies with Francis Ford Coppola. And he did not second unit, but he did something on The Rainmaker, that one of Coppola's early movies. Not the one with, not the John Grisham one, obviously, but an older movie. Finian's Rainbow, is that what it is? And so he gets into film school. Now think about all these guys that go to film school. And, most of them, they don't get jobs. It doesn't work out. And then every once in a while, there's a generation where a film school spits out Steven Spielberg, Robert Zemeckis, George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, Matthew Robbins, Willard Huyck, Gloria Katz, Bob Gale, all these guys that are in, within classrooms of each other. John Lasseter. It's crazy, right? And, Lucas was part of this renaissance, this new discovery of new talent. This is all in the 70s, and Lucas's vision comes to fruition with THX 1138. And I don't have notes up on the screen. I'll tell you when I put them up. This is all from just soaking in a lifetime of George Lucas's accomplishments. He made THX 1138 as a student film. Warner Brothers saw it and said, hey, that can be a feature film. They give him Robert Duvall. He makes it as a feature film. It does okay. I'm not a fan of it. It's a little too existential for me. I recognize in it that it's a good film. I get that. But I was a much bigger fan of his next film, American Graffiti. I think American Graffiti is a masterpiece. I was just talking to my friend Robbie at work the other day where he's like, I don't get American Graffiti. I said, Robbie, it's a product of his time. And even though I grew up in the 80s, me and Steve and Aaron and Terry, we used to go cruising all the time. Cruising down Hollywood Boulevard in the 80s was a big deal. You start one end of the Sunset Strip, where the big cowboy, the Marlboro cowboy was, head all the way down to the other end and back. And American Graffiti, though it takes place in 62, still embodied that loneliness of driving around in the dark, as far as we were concerned, looking for girls, looking for a connection, trying to, prove to ourselves that we were desirable to the opposite sex, because it wasn't happening in high school. And though Steve's car was a brown Capri, for us it was a limousine, and we floated down Sunset Boulevard on those Saturday nights, cranking Huey Lewis and the News and Bruce Hornsby on the Range, and never meeting a single woman the entire time, because it wasn't in the cards, folks. Just like Terry the Toad in American Graffiti, or look at the cast of that movie. Ron Howard, Cindy Williams. I think that they always say that Love American Style is what begat Happy Days. But, there's no doubt that Ron Howard and Cindy Williams in American Graffiti really ushered in the Happy Days wave of TV shows. Happy Days begat Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy and Joni Loves Chachi. All from Love American Style, but also, I think, American Graffiti. And I think there's also something, Star Warsian in American Graffiti. If you've ever seen the film, at the end, Richard Dreyfuss's character actually gets to meet the DJ, Wolfman Jack, who says, it's not me, man, the Wolfman's everywhere. And he can, Kurt can see that it's really the Wolfman. And it's kind of like the Darth Vader reveal, where it's like we're seeing the guy behind the guy, the mystique, the magic, right? But in those early films, Lucas is showing his bravado as a filmmaker. And for decades after, American Graffiti remained the most profitable studio film of all time. On its tiny little budget, it made so much money. People went again and again and again. And he used all that to make Star Wars, to get the studio to listen to him. First, he tried to buy the rights to Buck Rogers. He was told they weren't for sale, or Flash Gordon. So he said, fine, I'll just make my own. So everybody who's quick to say that, and I'm repeating myself, I apologize, that George Lucas has sour grapes over Star Wars, take the following into account, right? Disney gives him $4 billion in cash for the Star Wars franchise, for Lucasfilm, and everything that goes with it. Do you know he gave all that money to charity? He didn't keep any of it. He didn't need any of it. He sold Star Wars so that he could have access to that amount of cash before he passed away. Because everybody knows that for all of us, the clock is ticking. But here's a guy who can see the clock ticking, and he's not going to die tomorrow or next week. He's probably got 20 more years in him. But he can see the clock ticking, and before he goes, he's going to sell his biggest asset and then give all the money to the arts. That's a guy who can, at that point, he can say anything he wants. Are you kidding me? $4 billion? That's up there with what Bill Gates gives away. Oh my God. $4 billion to the arts. Enough to fund the arts for 1,000 lifetimes. Music, film, you name it, writing, poetry, painting, museums, preserving art, creating art. All that money goes to that. So if the guy's got a few choice words for the way somebody's treating his kids, he's allowed to say it. And you know what? He's allowed to even be right. He's allowed to be right, folks. And everybody wants to get on his case about how, well, they're just upset. Okay. Oh my God. I'm ready to come out of my chair. I never want episodes to be this frantic and all over the place, but sometimes I get on a tangent. Everybody's so, here's the thing. Oh my God. Everybody wants to get on and go, well, Lucas is just upset because The Force Awakens is better than the prequels. Well, yeah, The Force Awakens is better than the prequels, right? Of course they are. The prequels are, I'm not a prequel apologist. I've done an hour on Phantom Menace, an hour on Attack of the Clones. I didn't even get to Sith because I don't think I could sit through it again because they're not good movies. But you know what they are? This is going to piss everybody off. They're their own stories. They're their own thing. So they're very expensive, independent movies trying to say something different. Do I agree with what they say? No. Do I think the bad guy needs a 6-hour backstory? No, I don't. Do I applaud the audacity of a guy to make those movies on his own dime? Absolutely. You think J.J. Abrams wrote a check for Star Wars? No, he was given a check by the Walt Disney Company, who footed the bill for the entire thing. You know, the 6 original Star Wars movies under George Lucas's hands were independent movies financed by Lucasfilm. He was beholden to nobody. Those films were about whatever he wanted them to be about. So, the idea that he's somehow jealous because Disney and Friends have made a movie that stars Harrison Ford, Carrie Fisher, minor appearance by Mark Hamill, but also stars X-Wings, Millennium Falcons, R2-D2, C-3PO. Is this a joke? Because at any time in the last 30 years, George Lucas could have made that movie. He could have made that movie in his sleep. If somebody said, hey, George, we're going to, you know what? Don't pay for it. We'll pay for it. We're going to give you, the Disney company is going to give you $300 million to make a Star Wars movie that's a remake of A New Hope with all the familiar tropes and characters and locales. And well, of course he would have made that. Look at how much it's made. It's going to be the #1 film of all time. But it's not some big revelation. Somebody taking all of the things that George Lucas already made and making a movie with them is not rocket science. You know what I mean? If I put a hamburger on a bun, I didn't invent the hamburger. I'm making my own hamburger using somebody else's stuff. And I enjoyed Force Awakens. I thought it was a good movie. But this idea that it's somehow going to erase all that George Lucas has done to Star Wars is absurd. There is no Millennium Falcon without George Lucas. There is no Han Solo, no Chewbacca, no Force, no lightsabers, nothing. All of us kids who picked up a wrapping paper tube when we were small and went, that's George Lucas. I know I'm all over the place, but I see all this stuff on Facebook, and everybody's got an opinion. Everybody's got an outlet now to tell you what they're thinking about, and God bless, it's made the world a better place as far as communication is concerned. So this is just my take, and you can hit stop at any time. You don't have to listen to me. But it just seems like we're going to discount the guy that created all this stuff. Are you joking? Really? I know that Jeff Lindsay, who wrote the Dexter novels, the TV show is better than his novels. But you can't go, throw Jeff Lindsay out. He created it. It's his thing. I know that Ronald Moore, when he rebooted Battlestar Galactica, was able to take all the stuff we liked about Battlestar Galactica and make it 10,000 times better. But he didn't invent Battlestar Galactica. You know, J.J. Abrams didn't invent Star Wars or Star Trek. They bring in the guy, he's the reboot guy. Him and his people sit around a table, and they go, what did everybody like about those other movies? Because let's do that. Oh, they like robots carrying secret plans. Got it. And they're going to be in the desert. Check. And there's going to be somebody who dreams of getting off the desert planet. Got it. And then they're going to escape using the Millennium Falcon. Well, that's pretty specific, but you know what? We'll do that too. And I'm not going to go into a beat-by-beat breakdown of how The Force Awakens is a remake of New Hope, because if you're a fan, you already know in your brain. And it's okay to go, look, it doesn't matter, Jeff. We're going to ignore all that because it was a damn good movie, and it's what we've wanted since 1983. I get all that. Of course I get all that. I'm a Star Wars fan. I named my kid Luke Skywalker, for God's sake. I wanted to turn my first car into a land speeder. Like, I'm a nerd. I live and breathe the Star Wars universe. I don't make a move without consulting the Force. I mean, give me a break, right? But this idea now that we're going to close the door, like Disney's like, no, George wants to help on the movies. No, we're good. Are you kidding? Really? No, here's the thing. You have a meeting with George. You write down everything that he says, and when he's about to leave, you say, you know what, thank you, Mr. Lucas, for your time. And then when he leaves, you decide whether or not you want to put it in the movie. But you don't poo-poo the guy right out the door. Oh my God. Are you joking? He's the guy. And like I said in the beginning of the show, he's going to be remembered for Star Wars above all. But if we take Star Wars out of the equation and we say that, okay, Lucas's Star Wars empire of movies that he owned wholly, think about that. How many filmmakers own their movies? You could probably count them on one hand because everything's controlled by the studio system. Nobody owns nothing. Jack Kirby died owning none of the characters that he created. Stan Lee is given a courtesy. He does not own any of the characters he created for Marvel Comics. And yet George Lucas owned all of them. Every single character that you can name. Every character that was given a ridiculous name. Because, you know, in the 90s, they set about giving everybody a name. Walrus Man became Ponda Baba. Hammerhead became Momande Dawn. The Cantina band that I called the Buttheads became Figurin' Dan and the Modal Nodes. And by the way, their canon name is they're Jizz Whalers. I didn't make that up. Everybody gets a backstory. He owns them all, or he did, up until 2012. So Lucas has all this Star Wars behind him. And what does he do? Okay. Here's what we all wanted. We all had this dream that George Lucas, after 1983, and this is my dream, that he was going to crank out a Star Wars movie every 3 years. That in 1986, we were going to get Episode 7. And in 1989, Episode 8. Like, this is what we all dreamed of. Instead, we got the Ewok Adventure and Ewoks Battle for Endor. And they were poor substitutes. And the cartoons were even worse. But that's all we got. And then Star Wars died because it's only a modern day thing that franchises are not allowed to die ever. That thing you like, it's going to be around forever. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we're going to make stuff for them until the end of time. Used to be Barbie and Hot Wheels were the only constants in the toy aisle. And now Star Wars is there, Cars is there, Marvel's there. These brands are never going away. Ever. So if we take all of that and we say that Lucas didn't do what we wanted him to do. He didn't make all those Star Wars movies, those movies that we dreamed of. The closest we got was he said, let somebody else do it. And Timothy Zahn wrote the Heir to the Empire trilogy. The finest Star Wars books ever written. And you know what? Here's some blasphemy. They're better than The Force Awakens. Admiral Thrawn is a villain 10 times better than Kylo Ren. You think I'm kidding? Read them. And those came out 20 plus years ago. So what does George Lucas do? Instead of resting on just Star Wars for the rest of his life, George Lucas sets about doing the following. This is all from my brain, folks. I have no notes up yet, because I'm not at the note saga yet, and I'm 40 minutes in, so who knows if I'll even get to them. He creates Lucasfilm. He creates, are you joking? Him and Spielberg create, along with Lawrence Kasdan, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones. So he concentrates now on the Indiana Jones trilogy, saga, after Return of the Jedi. Okay, so the guy that gave us Star Wars, the greatest thing to ever hit the playground or the toy chest in the history of mankind, also gave us Indiana Jones. Okay. I've written novels. I'm on book 4 of my book series. They're about magicians. They're about a magical family. They're the closest I'm ever going to get to Indiana Jones or Star Wars. They're my attempt at outliving myself through the printed page. Whether they ever become movies or not, doesn't matter. I've created them. They exist. They're part of the world. This guy did Star Wars and Indiana Jones. And he didn't stop there. Because through his efforts at Lucasfilm, he also had a hand in creating Pixar. Are you kidding me? Pixar? The first time we ever saw a digital character on screen was young Sherlock Holmes. It was a stained glass knight who leapt off the window pane and menaced the cleric through the church. When I saw that in the screen, 1985, your mind was blown because it looked unlike anything it's supposed to look in the history of cinema. Effects are not supposed to look like that. This thing was, the movie's, hit or miss with folks. It really is. But the effect of that night coming out is unbelievable. And it heralded a new age. So Lucas pours all this money into what's eventually he's going to sell off and allow to become, are you kidding me? Pixar? Toy Story? Bug's Life? So we can now, okay, I'm not going to give him full credit because, I know that the people who worked on those films personally get the credit for that. But they don't get to do that unless Lucas has a hand in it. The Omnidroid edit machine. Lucas pours all this money allowing filmmakers to edit their movies digitally. Any of you who have ever tried to make a movie on your computer, I've made a few mini movies. They're incredibly time consuming. But they're so much easier now because you're not editing using a razor blade and glue. You're editing digitally. None of that is possible without George Lucas. This is the guy who did that. He allowed that. The Dykstra camera, the Go Motion camera. He's the guy that gave all the money to allow that to be made. So you can have special effects that don't look... we all love Ray Harryhausen, but let's be honest, they look sketchy when they move. Watch the original Clash of the Titans. And then watch the speeder bike chase using Go Motion models. Lucas does all that. He's the guy. These are inventions that he gave to the world that revolutionized the way we look at things and the way we maneuver things. Star Wars was edited using a razor blade and glue. Everybody looks at editing and thinks that it's like this big magical thing. No. It wasn't that long ago. And oh my God, we're talking probably up until early 90s. Before digital editing became viable, people were still cutting film by hand and saving scenes on rollers to make sure they had them in case they got to cut them back in. That's why editing is a mystifying process to me, especially guys who did it by hand. These guys are geniuses on a level I can never get to. Here's what else you need to think about. And I'm going to jump ahead to the prequels. But then we'll jump back to some of the other stuff. You ever thought about what it took to make those prequels? I don't know exactly when they put Phantom Menace in pre-production. Probably 97 or 9. No, it's definitely 95, 96. Because 95 was the big push to get people to buy Star Wars before it went away or before it was changed into the special editions. And then 2 years after the special, because special editions came out in 97, then in 99 we get Phantom Menace. And Phantom Menace, even though it's lauded as being this big digital production, it was mostly model work. A lot of people don't know that. Other than Jar Jar Binks, nearly everything you see on film was a model. They had Naboo ships, they had the Queen's Palace, all model work, right? So, and then the prequels ended in 2005 with Revenge of the Sith. So, let's be generous here and say 96 he starts pre-production on Phantom Menace, and then 2005 Revenge of the Sith hits theaters, and in that time he makes 3 movies, 6 hours long, right? But it takes 9 years, 3 years per movie to make a Star Wars movie. Do you know, have any idea what kind of commitment that is in your life? 9 years? Think about 9 years. In 9 years, a baby goes from a newborn to 4th grade. A car goes from new to trade-in. 9 years. I know people that can't even put together a jigsaw puzzle without losing interest. And this guy spends 9 years making 3 movies that are gonna be around forever. And this is after knowing what it takes to make these movies, having already done it. You know, I know in my brain what it takes to write a book. And when I sat down to do book 4, I wanted to die. I wrote, page 1, chapter 1, page 1, The Ice Temple. And I know that it's going to take me a year and a half to get to page 400 and something and call that book finished. And that's, when you're starting out, that is so daunting and you want to just quit. It's so easy just to go play video games or make popcorn and watch a movie that you love. It's so easy to just say, look, I'm not going to be bothered. But if you're a creative person, you know that you can't. And anybody that goes, well, you do that because, you must have a lot of free time on your hands. No, I don't. I've said it before in the show. I hate that saying, you must have a lot of free time. I don't have any free time. 0. I got 3 kids. I got a career at a theme park. And I also sell on eBay. These are full-time gigs, right? And I still find time to write. You know why? Because I have to. Because if I don't, the story that's in my head will explode and I'll go insane. And if you don't understand that, then you're not creative, and I envy you. I am not a consumer. I am a producer. So I have the utmost respect for guys that can say, "Look, we're going to start day." And I know that you're going to go. Here's what the naysayer is going to say. Well, of course, I would spend 3 years making a movie if I get paid that kind of money. Oh yeah, sure. Well, think about Star Wars, Phantom Menace. Nobody knew it was going to be a hit. Anybody can say, look, it was a guaranteed hit from day one. That's not true. No movie is a sure thing. There is no such thing in Hollywood as a sure thing. You know what was perceived as a sure thing? Terminator Genesis. Oh, that's a sure thing. Oh, it bombed? How? It's got Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the Terminator. Well, nobody liked it, and nobody went and saw it. Oh, we're in trouble. No such thing as a sure thing. No such thing as spending 3 years of your life on a movie with the idea that at the end you're going to get a big check. Because it's not always the case. Unless you're a director for hire. Now, Force Awakens can come out and bomb, and J.J. Abrams is still going to get a check. But Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Return of the Jedi, The Empire Strikes Back, those are all independent movies financed solely by George Lucas and bank loans. Because after Star Wars, Lucas said, I'm never going to make a movie where I don't have complete creative control. And whether you think that's good or bad doesn't matter. The fact that he was willing to literally put his money where his mouth is, that's what does matter. So we've got the Dykstra camera, the OmniDroid editing bay, Pixar. What else have we got? Indiana Jones. If we just steer clear of Star Wars, these are all of George Lucas's unbelievable accomplishments. Right? How about the National Film Registry. Lucas was one of the biggest supporters of this in the 80s, where he appeared. I know he appeared before Congress and said that movies should be preserved exactly the way they are, and then he went ahead and changed Star Wars. I get the irony of that. Don't think it's not lost on me. It's not lost on me. So I get that, but it doesn't change the fact that he went before Congress and said, "Look, you need to come up with a system to save these movies before they disintegrate." Because before the digital revolution happened, before everything was coded digitally, it was actually preserved physically. And a lot of movies that we treasure, the originals, were in danger of completely vanishing from this earth. And a lot of movies, before they came up with the way to save them and, again, pay for that, all that, and I'm sure Lucas had a big check signed away for that, before all that happened, a lot of movies were simply lost to time. So we'll chalk that in there. We'll also chalk in Industrial Light and Magic, where if you look at the studio system prior to Star Wars, every studio has a few guys on the lot who do the special effects. Right before Star Wars, the biggest special effects movie was Logan's Run, with some of the most amazing model work ever done, all done by the studio. No outside people. Wait, you're going to start a company that just does effects for the movies? Oh, that's ridiculous. Oh, yeah, well, just watch me, and I'm going to be the... sure, George, you're crazy. And so George sinks all this money. Now, I've read the making of Star Wars. I have it. I've read it 3 or 4 times. And a lot of the budget for Star Wars went directly into the creation of Industrial Light and Magic. Because Lucas knew, look, I can film the actors on these plywood sets, but the movie's nothing without the spaceships. And ILM didn't start delivering special effects shots till way, way late in the game. And that's why the first rough cuts of Star Wars featured World War II dogfights, edited to simulate what the X-Wings were going to do in the final cut. So Lucas is slowly building Industrial Light and Magic and telling these crazy, almost hippie guys who are willing to work 19 hours a day to get 19 hours a day to build a model of a spaceship that is going to be taken one room over and blown up. And these people are all crazy. And yet they see in George Lucas this amazing man that they're willing to follow to the ends of the earth to do this. And so people like Phil Tippett, Joe Johnston, Dennis Muren, all follow him and revolutionize the studio system and how the studio treats special effects artists. And I know all of this has gone out the window. We've all heard the horror stories of Rhythm and Hughes and the companies who did like Life of Pi and then went out of business because now there's too many businesses and they're all undercutting themselves and no one can stay in business and no one can afford to pay a blah, 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 whatever. But there's no industry without George Lucas taking the first step. Of George Lucas saying, look, if you're going to make a movie called Dragon Slayer, allow us to do the dragon. And Vermithrax suddenly comes to life via the animators of ILM. And then, boom, the effects rages on, right? And that's not to discount any of the work that Rick Baker or Chris Wallace or Richard Edlund, and all of my childhood heroes who did special effects, who each brought their own flavor, but they can all be traced to George Lucas. Rick Baker worked on the Cantina sequence. Richard Edlund's Boss Films was a direct offshoot of ILM. ILM is when you think of special effects, you think of ILM. That's just it. I know now that Digital Domain and Weta, and they're all rock stars. But there's none of that without Mr. Lucas stepping in and carving the path. Without George Lucas, the house at the end of Poltergeist doesn't get sucked up in the vortex. Right? Or all the other amazing effect shots that they did in the 80s. So many mind-blowing scenes that up until that point, the studio would have said, look, we don't know how we're going to do this. This movie can't get made. Forget about it. Get someone else. Oh. How many movie scripts came across the studio head's desk, and the guy said, look, there's no way to do these effects. And they said, look, we're going to get ILM. Done. Green light. There's probably 40 or more. No joke, man. And a lot of them are classics, you know. ILM did the effects for Back to the Future. And the Indiana Jones movies. And Howard the Duck. I mean, yeah, the movie's been maligned. And I'm not going to go into, well, you know, George Lucas gave us Howard the Duck. But he did. But see, here's what you're missing in the Howard the Duck saga. Is that George had some friends, Willard Hike and Gloria Katz. And they were a screenwriting team, a husband and wife. And he was constantly giving them work. They have no career without George Lucas. They wrote More American Graffiti. They wrote Temple of Doom. They wrote Howard the Duck. You know? So Lucas is helping out all his friends. He also helped out a guy named Walter Murch. Probably never even heard of Walter Murch. Right? Who knows who Walter Murch is? But Walter Murch is a first-time director on a movie. Right? He's given the movie because he knows and works with George Lucas. So they give him the movie. He goes to England to film it, and things go completely haywire. And the studio says, we're going to shut the movie down. And George Lucas says, no, I'll fly over and finish it. I don't think he even got paid. And that movie was Return to Oz, which I think is a masterpiece. They don't make movies like that anymore. Dark children's movies. With a vision, you know? With a vision. But George Lucas is the uncredited second unit director. He also did second unit directing on Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know who got the monkey to do the Heil Hitler salute? George Lucas. I think it took 6 hours to get the monkey to do that. Thank you, Mr. Lucas. Right? We could go on and on and on. You ever heard of a movie called Radioland Murders? It's not a very good movie. Christopher Lloyd, Brian Benben, early 90s flick. George Lucas got the studio to greenlight it because he had an idea for digital backgrounds, sets that weren't there. Not model work, all computer. So he got the studio to greenlight this movie, and he used it as a training ground for digital backgrounds. So without Radioland Murders, a Lucasfilm production, a lot of the movies of the 90s and the early 2000s, they don't get made because you can't build the sets. They're too expensive. Now we have whole movies where the actors they don't even go on location. I don't think Angelina Jolie went anywhere in the sun for Maleficent. The whole movie being filmed in Downey on a green screen. Same with 300. How many other movies? Robert Rodriguez gets to do Sin City on a green screen. Why? Because George Lucas paved the way for him to do that. No doubt. Oh, man. And don't think the irony is not lost on me, after having railed against George Lucas for 10 years, to sit here at an hour and defend the guy for all the things that he's done that weren't Star Wars, because now we're talking bad about the guy because he had the nerve to badmouth Star Wars. And now that's the hip thing to do. Now that Star Wars has come out, now it's number one. It's going to beat Avatar, any minute now. Now the hip thing to do is to bash it. I'm not going to bash Force Awakens. It's not a bad movie. It does everything that it's supposed to do, relaunching a franchise. It's familiar, it's new, blah, 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 blah. But cutting Lucas out, I can't deal with it. It's ridiculous. Ridiculous. And I my conscience can't have it. My childhood can't have it because the guy was God to me. Still is. Always will be. Always. Helps out Francis Ford Coppola, director of The Godfather 2, considered the two of the finest movies ever made. In the 80s, Coppola had some bad luck. Some real bad luck. Made a lot of crappy movies. And Lucas stepped in and said, I'm going to help you make a few movies to save Zoetrope Studios. So he gets the studio to to hire Coppola not only to make Captain EO. I mean, people forget, Francis Ford Coppola directed Captain EO. Are you kidding? Also, Tucker the Man in His Dream, which was a solid studio picture, which I don't know if they would have allowed Coppola to direct if Lucas hadn't stepped in and said, look, I'll be there to make sure it stays on budget, because Coppola was famous for going over budget. Lucas did the final draft rewrite of Apocalypse Now? How many more accomplishments creatively do we have to go through before we acknowledge that it's enough that he's allowed to sit back and have a few harsh words about the way his characters are being treated in the current film? I think that's the crux of this whole show, is how many things do we have to tell you that he's famous and accomplished for before it's enough to go, I'm going to give the guy a pass? How many? I mean, oh my God. The toy aisle would not be the way it is without George Lucas and the visionaries at Kenner who saw in the property something worth latching onto. Board games, action figures, video games. I mean, I didn't even get to LucasArts. He starts a video game company that pioneers games that tell stories. Any of you, like me, who had a Nintendo Entertainment System, the first one, knows that most of the games were shoot him, fire this, run across the screen. And then suddenly there's a game that comes out called Maniac Mansion that has this 1.5 to 2 hour storyline, including the first ever red herrings in a game where you were invited to do tasks excuse me, that didn't affect the outcome. Like, wait a minute, they took up memory space, having you do stuff that wasn't part of the game, it said you could do it or not. That was unheard of at the time. And Maniac Mansion actually went on to become a sitcom. Nothing to do with Star Wars. Nothing to do. How about Labyrinth? He produced Labyrinth. Without George Lucas, there's no Labyrinth. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to imagine a childhood without Labyrinth. Because there he was, doing what? Helping his friends out again. Because as much as we love The Dark Crystal, the studio sure didn't. And the box office grosses didn't. Because The Dark Crystal bombed. It's a masterpiece now. Looking at it in hindsight, you go, who cares what the box office said? The Dark Crystal is a masterpiece. It's a puppet movie that doesn't feel like a puppet movie. But at the time, the studios weren't going to give Jim Henson a movie that big. And Lucas steps in and says, look, we're all in it together, and we're going to make Labyrinth. Done. And Labyrinth features not only solid storytelling, great characters, but the first of its kind computer opening credits with the owl. And I know that because I sat there in the theater transfixed by that owl, knowing that it wasn't real. And not believing it. I just couldn't believe it. What about morphing? Remember morphing when morphing was a big deal? Like, it's hard to describe. Like, up until morphing, if you wanted a guy to turn into a werewolf, there were 10,000 cuts. You showed his hand, he was screaming. You went back to his hand, it had fur on it. You showed his face, he's screaming. He buries his face in his hands. He takes his hands away, now he's a werewolf. That's the way it was done. Or they did time-lapse photography. But then Lucas greenlights a movie called Willow. And Willow, whether you like it or not, it's not a particularly good movie. But Willow was the movie that debuted morphing technology, where they built all these models, and they told the computer, take this model at the beginning, the 5 in the middle, and the 1 at the end, and fill in the gaps so that it looks like it's one seamless evolution. And then, I mean, you take it for granted now, but morphing was such a big deal when it came out. When Michael Jackson used it in the black or white video, that's John Landis directed that. You can trace that back to Willow and George Lucas telling ILM, we're not going to stop till it looks right. And that effect was used at the end of Last Crusade when Donovan drinks from the wrong grail. I mean, these are just little things that the guys had a hand in bringing to the screen. Digital editing. Oh my God. You can't even imagine. I know I already talked to it, but you can't imagine what it was like to cut a movie by hand versus digital. When I met the guys who edited Back to the Future, we talked about the way things have changed, and they said, what's the greatest invention of the last 30 years? And the guy simply said, the undo button. Because they never had that before. You took the film, you cut it with a razor blade, you glued it back together, and you looked at it. And if it was wrong, you did it again. And then you did it again, and again, and again. And the undo button, he said, took all the worry out of that. Because if you didn't like it, you could just click undo, and it was back the way it was. Matthew Robbins. You don't even know who he is. Film director. Lucas helped him out a lot. And Matthew Robbins eventually directed Batteries Not Included for Universal. ILM did all the effects on that. And I'm sure Lucas vouched for the guy. Look, this guy's a good guy. Give him a shot. There were so many people out of that film school that Lucas vouched for and got them big projects. Now, whether they hung on and were able to stay in the business is up to them. But can you imagine going to the studio with an idea knowing that George Lucas is standing behind you? Nowadays, it's like, God, it's ridiculous to think that nowadays there are filmmakers that wouldn't do that. Go in with George Lucas? Oh, I would never do that. Are you kidding? One of the most creative people of the last 50 years, 100 years, and you're not going to use him for all that he's worth? Well, the prequels were bad. Well, that's it? Well, Crystal Skull was bad. Okay, so because of that, we're going to discount everything the guy has done? Well, then it's your loss, my friend. Not mine. Ridiculous. Well, he created Jar Jar Binks. Who cares? Yeah, Jar Jar was a misfire character-wise. But without Jar Jar, there's no Smeagol. Without Jar Jar, there's no Dobby. Without Jar Jar, there's no Maz in the current film. Because up until that point, I mean, even in The Phantom Menace, the first cut of The Phantom Menace, Yoda is still a handheld puppet being moved by Frank Oz. He isn't digital in The Phantom Menace original cut to the very end when he walks across the floor. I know, because I was waiting for that shot, because it's the first time we ever got to see Yoda walk. And these were big moments for us. Digital Yoda. Now, the digital Yoda in 2 is flipping around and lightsaber back. I get all that. I get that eventually he became a guy with too many toys. There's no doubt about that. I am not a prequel apologist in any way. I said that at the beginning, and I'll say it at the hour-plus mark. But so many scripts. I'll even go one step further. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I know there were other people working on digital effects in the 90s. I know James Cameron and his team were coming up with, oh my God. ILM did the pseudopod in the Abyss, which led to the liquid Terminator in Judgment Day, which led to the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. So those are all ILM. No one else gets credit for those except ILM. They revolutionized the way we make movies, the way we look at movies. And more importantly, and you wouldn't know this unless you're a nerd like me and you sit and study things, but the entire Marvel universe wouldn't exist without ILM because they've been trying to make Spider-Man for 20 years. Spider-Man was supposed to come out in 1986, courtesy of Canon Films, with Charlie Sheen as Peter Parker. And it never happened. Why? Because they couldn't do the webbing. All through the 90s, James Cameron was constantly working on a Spider-Man script with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Doc Ock, and it never got made. Why? Because the effects were never up to par. And why were the effects up to par for the 2002 release of Spider-Man? Because of all the work that ILM had done on digital effects. Without Spider-Man, now you can say that X-Men came first, but there weren't a lot of effect shots in X-Men. Not the way there were in Spider-Man. But without Spider-Man, there's no Marvel Universe. Zero. Because you don't have the effects teams working on it. And I know that the Marvel Universe has brought people countless hours of joy as far as connecting movies and blah, blah, blah and all that. There's no Transformer movies. Maybe that's a good thing, but you know what I mean. So, George Lucas's imagination, George Lucas's hard work, his sweat, his dedication to projects that take years to come to fruition cannot ever be discounted because you don't like a couple of projects that he worked on or that he's got a couple of nasty things to say about something you really like. It's all moot. If he wants to say that he sold Star Wars to white slavers, that's how he feels about it. And why are we at a point in our society where nobody's allowed to say how they feel about things because we don't want to offend anybody? Ladies and gentlemen, the basis for America is being offended, not the right to not be offended. Freedom of speech means that I'm going to fight to the death so that you can say the very thing that makes my blood boil, but I'm going to defend your right to say it because you're going to defend my right to say the very thing that upsets you. And that's what the country is founded on. If you find it offensive, who cares? Being offended does nothing. What do you do with that emotion? Nothing. It simmers, you get upset, you move on. Maybe you tell yourself, I'm not going to buy anything that he produces. That's your prerogative. You've made your choice and you voted with your dollars. But to somehow say that he doesn't have a right to an opinion in the very universe that he created is ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. If Stan Lee came out and said that the Fantastic Four movie was a travesty, you'd all nod your head and go, yeah, of course it was. If he came out and he said that X2, X-Men United was bad, we'd all go, oh no, Stan, oh, you can't say that. Well, of course you can say anything you want. Are you crazy? America's, this show is the based on the freedoms of the country that I live in. I can state my opinion on my stupid little soapbox that finally brings me to the average height of the average male. And here I am, shouting from the rooftops a bunch of malarkey and nonsense about George Lucas. A man, I know, it's ridiculous, a man that I vilified. But when you sit and you think about it, and I like to bring back idle time. Because nowadays, when everybody's got an idle moment, the phone comes out. Check Facebook, check Twitter, play Candy Crush. I'm the odd man. I stare off into space and think about George Lucas. Or the movie I just saw, or the book I'm reading, or a new way of looking at things. And don't tell me that I don't get to do it. Because I do. If you don't like the show, don't listen. It's easy as that. The show offends you, don't listen. It's your right to turn me off. But don't tell me I don't get to say it. And don't tell me that George Lucas doesn't get to say it. I'm sure Walt Disney had choice words for tons of his projects. The people who run big companies like that don't get that way by being the nice guy all the time. And I, for one, I welcome back the feisty George Lucas and say, Mr. Lucas, we have missed you. We have missed you dearly. And if you want to make a bunch of movies in a row, I can't wait to see what they are. Now, I didn't go see Red Tails or Strange Magic, so I'm not putting my money where my mouth is, but moving forward, let's say from this point on. And not only did the Charlie Rose interview come out, but that amazing exchange that he had on the red carpet for The Force Awakens, the interviewer says, what will you be doing? He goes, I'll be making a few movies. Where will we see them? Well, you won't, because they're just for me and my friends. And that's a guy who doesn't give a crap. And that's, I mean, here's the thing I can't figure out. Isn't the goal of the system that we're in, the idea is to make enough money so that you're comfortable and then you can say and feel however you want and not care what somebody who doesn't matter to you thinks? Because George Lucas is a guy that doesn't care. He's never cared. He's got so much money and clout and power, he doesn't care. Who shot first? Greedo, Han? Whatever he says. They're his movies. I believe Han shot first because it makes his character. But George Lucas has always said, Greedo shoots first. Well, then that's his. Okay. What am I going to do now? I'm offended. Oh. Well, what's that going to do? That and 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee at the county fair, right? Give me a break. Give me an absolute friggin' break. So on that red carpet, he turns to leave, and the best moment comes, and the camera, thank God, is still rolling, because Frank Marshall rose up. Now, Frank Marshall has been a producing partner of Lucas almost from the beginning. And Frank directed a few movies of his own. He directed Arachnophobia. He directed Congo. And he's the keeper of the Jurassic Park franchise. And, Jurassic World had a pretty good run this year. Talk about another retread. And Frank says, it's not going to beat Force Awakens Star Wars is not going to beat Jurassic World. And Lucas just looks at him. Now, these are two friends, so I get the joke. But Lucas just goes, I'll crush you like a bug. And that's what we want. I want a guy like that. I want a guy who says what he feels and doesn't tiptoe around whatever the subject is. It's his universe, and we're all just playing in it. Give me a break. He's the guy that convinced Alec Guinness to become Obi-Wan Kenobi. And convinced a studio to take a risk on something called The Star Wars, featuring Luke Starkiller and Han Solo and Chewbacca, his 7-foot-tall lizard. I mean, the original stuff's crazy. But he had the vision. So he gets to say whatever he wants and he gets a pass. And if you're offended, that's your problem, not his. So I'm going to wrap up because it's an hour plus here without taking a break. I didn't even get to I didn't even get to the fact that he was the guy who championed Akira Kurosawa and got the Academy to recognize him. He probably was the guy who also got the Academy to finally realize digital effects, special effects, makeup, costume, a lot of that stuff. They didn't give out awards, technical awards. They didn't give all that. Lucas doesn't have an Oscar. Marcia got it for editing. Joe Johnston got it for effects. Lucas didn't get a directing Oscar. He didn't get a Best Picture Oscar. Spielberg's got one for Saving Private Ryan. Schindler's List, I mean. Right? Lucas doesn't have one. He's got the Irving B. Thalberg Award. The thanks but no thanks. You never won an Oscar. Here's a trophy. But, I mean, if you ask somebody on the street, they'll go, oh, yeah, he's got an Oscar. Of course he does. He doesn't. He needs one, but it's too late. But I didn't even bring up my pages on the internet here. What did I have up? I had Lucasfilm's filmography. So if we look at Lucasfilm, just for note taking, folks. American Graffiti, Star Wars, More American Graffiti, The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Return of the Jedi, Twice Upon a Time, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Latino, Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, Labyrinth, Howard the Duck, Willow, Tucker, The Man in His Dream, The Land Before Time. Do you know how many sequels The Land Before Time he got? Like 30. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Radioland Murders, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, Crystal Skull, Clone Wars, Red Tail, Strange Magic. And then the Lucas dynasty is over. And it ends. What are you going to do? He was executive producer uncredited on Body Heat. You ever seen Body Heat? That's Lawrence Kasdan's directorial debut with Kathleen Turner and William Hurt. Fantastic movie. Captain EO. Star Tours. And you're gonna get upset at him because he didn't like Force Awakens? Blah. Blah to anybody who feels that way. Your nerd card will be revoked. Because he's the maker. He's the guy. His might be, are you kidding? His might be the only Star Wars opinion that actually matters. Put that in your back pocket. Put that in your pipe. And how about that as a proclamation? We're all just nerds living in George Lucas's universe. And he's the only one qualified enough to tell us what to feel. I don't really believe that, but it's fun to say. Well, how about this? Like, I even watched The People versus George Lucas, starring my friend Chris Gore, where they vilified Lucas for 30 minutes and then lauded him. So I know all about it. Dear Mr. Lucas, on behalf of everybody in Generation X who dreamed of piloting an X-Wing and getting their own lightsaber and saving the galaxy and getting the girl and finding out the girl was his sister, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for all the playground adventures I had battling the Imperial forces alongside my good friends Carl and Toby and everybody else. Thank you for all the hours I sat with my Star Wars figures escaping divorce and losing my home, and all the birthdays that were nothing until Star Wars figures were opened. Thank you. Every time I went to the store and I got excited because I saw new Star Wars figures on the pegs, thank you. For every moment I've had with my kids passing Star Wars down to them, thank you. Other than losing my virginity, Star Wars is at the front and center, major focus point of everything I did as a kid and a teenager. Star Wars, Star Wars, Star Wars. Thank you, Mr. Lucas, for opening your brain and giving us our lifestyle. Because that's what you did. And anybody who wants to tear you down, I'll put up my dukes. And I'll grab a broom and pretend it's a lightsaber and make whooshy noises as I beat the crap out of them. And say, you don't know who you're battling. Because you battle against him, you battle against all of us. There's no Jedi Knights without George Lucas. There's no Corellian, Millennium Falcon starfighters. There's no playset. There's no cantina. No blue milk. No Emperor. No Uncle. What about that one? What about that blue one? No Jawas. No Ewoks. No Wampas. No Tauntauns. No Bespin. No Lando. No Carbonite Freeze, no I Love You, I Know, no Boba Fett, no Darth Vader, no Stormtroopers, no Clone Troopers, no Jangos, no Anakin, no taking off Darth Vader's helmet and finding out that he's just a normal guy like the rest of us. Tell your sister you were right. No Ewok Village, no celebration, no speeder bikes, nothing. You get none of that without George Lucas. My birthday cake in 1979 had R2-D2 and C-3PO on it. That doesn't exist without George Lucas. I went to bed wearing Boba Fett pajamas. Thank you, Mr. Lucas. I spent every paycheck buying toys. Having tangible Star Wars items in my hand and getting like giddy holding them and feeling them and transferring my emotions to them. My blue snaggletooth, my droid's lightsaber, my Darth Vader helmet, Star Wars Holiday Special, the Ewoks Battle for Endor, C-3PO's cereal. A lifetime spent in George Lucas's universe. He's the guy. He's the guy. We owe it all to him. on behalf of nerds everywhere, of outcasts who dreamed of looking at two setting suns and saying to ourselves, I am more than the circumstances I am in, and I will become a better person. We say thank you to George Lucas. What else? What more is there to say other than that? I'm Jeff Tucker, and this is 91 Reasons.
Thanks for listening to 91 Reasons. Please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes. Find us on Facebook. Is anyone even still listening?